Hi, welcome to Crip Tips TV. My name's Debbie Patterson and I'm your host. So we've reached the end of our web series. This is the final episode of Crip Tips TV. Thank you all so much for joining us on this journey. Now, in some ways, I think we've saved the best till last because today I'm going to be talking to Jim Derksen. Now, if you live in Winnipeg, you know who Jim Derksen is. He cuts an impressive figure. If you've seen him, you're not soon going to forget him. But there's more to Jim than meets the eye, which is why I'm so excited to share our conversation with you today. And speaking of more than meets the eye, I also want to talk about our ASL interpreters, like Jordan here. Hi, Jordan. Some of you might be curious about our ASL interpreters, and so later on I'll be sitting down with them to chat about all things ASL interpretation. But first, here's my conversation with Jim. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Deb.
Thanks so much for joining us here on Crip Tips TV. Now, Jim, you're a polio survivor, yeah? And so you're no stranger to pandemics or epidemics. So at what age did you become disabled?
It was the first day of school for me when I'm in grade 1.
Okay.
Overnight, I developed a high fever, and when I tried to get out of bed, I fell on the floor.
Wow.
And I had a sore throat and a high fever, headache, so I didn't go to school. And it wasn't until the next day that my mom took me to the doctor, and he diagnosed it as probably polio.
Right.
So he drove into the city to have a spinal tap, final diagnosis.
Wow.
And then I was in the hospital for about a year.
What a lot for a little guy to go through.
Yeah, it was amazing.
You must have developed a lot of skills there in terms of, dealing with adversity or not getting to do the things you want to do. Yeah.
Well, I tell a story sometimes. There were 3 of us, all 6 years old, each in our own iron lung. And one iron lung began to smoke. Smoke was starting to build up in the room. And we tried to call for help, but our voices were very low.
Right.
As we weren't breathing very well. So people walked by and didn't hear us. And then I thought of the idea that if we did it in unison, so we did that, and the hospital staff looked in to see what was going on and saw the machinery starting to burn.
Wow.
So they came and got that guy out of the lung and unplugged the lung and got another machine in.
Wow.
And it was a great story to tell a group of people who I was trying to help them organize to achieve common goals.
So, Jim, I don't know if I've told you this before, but I kind of regard you as like an abilities mentor. I remember when I first started using a cane, you kind of made a point of checking in with me and finding out what was going on. And then you had all this information for me and just like really good advice on sort of navigating life with a disability. And we talked about the fact that I would probably become a wheelchair user at some point. And you had lots of really good advice for me. So, Jim, one of the things that you told me about one time was that you said every year when it starts to get cold, you start preparing yourself for winter when you know you're going to have to stay in a lot because it's so hard to get around in a wheelchair in Winnipeg in the winter. And so I wondered if you could talk a bit about what you do to prepare.
I think the most difficult thing for me over the years has been changing my relationship to the world in a way, because I am very gregarious and curious, and I really enjoy meeting people on the street, seeing my neighbors, seeing the birds in the park. And so I have to run that through my mind a number of times in the fall and take advantage and be grateful for the freedom I do have. It's something similar to the knowledge that I'm going to lose the ability to do things. And I talk about it to myself silently.
Right.
But I also talk to my friends and others about it so that it gains reality. And then it's easier when it happens. With post-polio syndrome, my previously very stable disability, going back to the early 50s, is no longer my reality. I'm losing a lot of abilities on a weekly and monthly basis and having to find out how I can achieve the same needs in a different way with help from technology or people, staff that I have. And so I have to build it into my mind so that I can accommodate it without feeling any shame or despair. And once I can build it into my idea of who I am and how I am, it's not so hard. It becomes easy. So that's how I prepare for the winter as well.
That's really great. Like I feel like a lot of people are having trouble with COVID because our sense of self is really thrown for a loop, right? Like the things that we use to, I don't know, define who we are lost to us. A lot of us, you know, we don't get to go into the office. As much as we enjoy not going to work, we don't get to do our regular routines. We don't wear the clothes that we like to wear. We don't, you know, go to the places. We don't shop in the places we like to shop. We don't, you know, all these things that sort of define who we are lost to us. Recognizing that your idea of who you are is as important as anything.
It's interesting with COVID because, like winter, it's not a permanent situation, but it comes to feel permanent after a while, longing for summer and spring or vaccination,
Yeah.
getting together without so much distance between each other. We are familiar with the winter summer cycles, so we have hope. But with COVID, we're not so familiar with pandemics. And even though we are told it won't be here forever this way, it's difficult sometimes to really appreciate that it may be temporary and there is something beyond COVID.
Yeah.
We need to do that.
But there's also this cruelty too of like knowing that it's going to end, and so feeling like, well, I don't have to really commit to, you know, making any changes for COVID. I can just wait, and then I'll be, you know, I'll get to be doing my real life again. And I think, like for me, knowing that this disability is permanent, I'm not going to be dancing in 4-inch heels ever again, that it allows me to sort of move on and to explore the values of the valuable parts of this experience that I think it would be harder to really sort of lean into if I thought it was just temporary.
Yes, absolutely. There is some wisdom built into disability experience. I remember somebody when I was in a body cast for two or three stretches of up to a year.
Oh.
And I got very itchy, and I used big knitting needles to try and scratch my chest or whatever. It was some other disabled person that said, you have to learn to itch where you can scratch. And so I took that in, and I think I achieved some learning in that direction.
Jim, I think a lot of people are stressed out around COVID because of the sort of the fear factor, you know, being afraid of getting sick, being afraid of getting COVID, being afraid of being in public. I wondered if you had, because you're probably a high risk individual. Do you live with that kind of fear?
Personally, I've been preparing for my mortality and the end of life because I know it's coming, and because of my age and other factors. I'm not sure I know how to deal with the fear of COVID, except to say that COVID is, like many other things, a risk. And I found that we confront a risk knowing that it could go sideways and we could get hurt. But choosing to go ahead and knowing that it's a gamble. I recall surgeons used to say to me when I was having a major surgery, I would ask, what's my chances?
Right.
They would say 80%, 90%. So then I was happy to know what my chances were, and I thought about it. And as in a card game or a game of dice, you throw the dice.
That seems really brave to me.
Well, if you don't do that, then you're stuck with whatever problem is coming to steamroller over you. I used to call it a gambler's stance, STANCE.
Right.
So it would be the stance I chose would be to gamble and take the risk. COVID has allowed us to do what we can. And what I've enjoyed doing is examining my life a little bit. I mean, people have talked about the benefit of living an examined life.
Right.
So I have tried to know myself,
Yeah.
partly because I think the beginning of all knowledge is to know oneself.
But you also have to be willing to change. You have to know yourself. You have to be willing to examine yourself, and not, as you say, not in a judgmental way, but just sort of as a means of exploration of, like, what are my assumptions, and are those assumptions actually facts, or are they just assumptions? And, you know, exploring like giving yourself broader scope. But then you have to be willing to change and to let go of your old assumptions. And I think that's the hard part.
But again, it's necessary, and it's better than the alternative.
So I think, Jim, people like you and I who are forced to change because our bodies change are maybe more comfortable with personal transformation, since it's something that we've had to accommodate in our lives and in our sense of who we are. Maybe that's one of the gifts of disability, is it teaches us how to transform.
And to do it with a right-minded effort to improve ourselves and our understanding, rather than to judge or otherwise become triumphant in a negative way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not about hating on the person you are and then becoming something else. It's about just trying something different.
Or why not?
Why not? Well, I'm very much looking forward to spring and getting out in the neighborhood and seeing you out and about. And you made me think of something. When I was sort of transitioning into a wheelchair, there was a time when I was using a cane and then I was using two crutches. And I didn't walk anywhere. I was never on the sidewalks. I would like go from my house into my car. Even if I was only going 3 blocks, I'd have to drive because I couldn't, I didn't have wheels under my butt, right? I got a little motorized scooter first and started tooling around on that and just realized I hadn't acknowledged how much I missed being on the sidewalk and how important that is just to feel like you're part of a community, that you're connected to your fellow human beings.
I
Yeah.
remember you were on a bicycle
Oh, yeah.
at the bookstore, and it was difficult. Struggle is something we often do, but you used a tree to lead the bike on, and then you got onto the bike and pushed off, and
Yeah.
the bike was a bit wobbly at first, but you kept it going. I was quite impressed by your determination to use that bike.
Yeah. I loved riding a bike.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I probably rode a bike for far too long. It was probably quite unsafe, but it was worth it, I think. Again, you take a gambler's stance, right? What are the odds of dying on this bicycle and what are the benefits of being able to ride my bike to where I want to go? And you just weigh them.
Having weighed them, you take the risk and live the life you can do.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on yet?
I think we've covered some of the really important things in life, like finding meaning and striving to achieve and understand. And the thing I'm still working on is a more ready kindness in my heart. I have a great appreciation for kindness, and I always find myself a little bit wanting.
In terms of kindness.
Yeah, hopefully I can gather a little more of that.
Yeah.
Wish me luck.
Good luck. Yeah. I think we all need a little more kindness in our hearts, We're all like when you're going through a hard time, it's hard to remember that everybody else is too.
Yeah.
And it's easy to, enumerate your difficulties and to focus on them and that compromises your ability to empathize, I think.
We'll all hope for more.
All hope for more kindness in our hearts. Thanks so much, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Crip Tips TV is produced by Sick and Twisted Theatre. Sick and Twisted is a disability theatre company, which means we feature performers who self-identify as disabled, deaf, mad, or sick. We want to break down barriers and make the world more accessible. Part of that is making sure that we have ASL interpretation and audio description on our videos and at our live shows. Now, you've been watching some of these familiar faces doing ASL interpretation in our videos, and I thought you might have some curiosity around that. So I'm sitting down with Jordan Sangalang and Joanna Hawkins, who are 2 of our interpreters, who are also 2 members of 100 Decibels, a deaf mime troupe that Sick and Twisted works with all the time. We're also sitting down with Cindy Bosco, who is an ASL English interpreter, who's been working with us from the beginning as well. Here's our conversation.
Hi, welcome to Crip Tips TV.
Oh, hi, Deb. Thank you very much for having us. Hello, Deb. It's really awesome to join you as well.
Great. Now, I'm so glad you're here. Now, our viewers have gotten used to seeing your beautiful faces because you've been providing the ASL interpretation on our whole video series, and it's been so great. Now, they've also gotten used to seeing Cindy, who is interpreting for us right now. But there's a big difference between the kind of interpretation you offer and the kind that Cindy offers. And so I wondered if you could tell our viewers a little bit about that.
Yes, there certainly is a difference. Non-deaf interpreters and deaf interpreters provide different interpretation, and the importance for having the deaf interpreter there is because they are native language users. They have that innate knowledge of how to really connect the information with the deaf community, making sure that information is clear, making those modifications that are necessary, not in a theatrical way or anything like that, but making sure that the structure of ASL is clear, all the grammar and syntax is represented accurately, and a non-deaf interpreter, what usually happens is they hear an utterance and have to interpret. They don't have much time to process the information. Certainly, they're certainly skilled, but oftentimes it can be more influenced by English order because of the pacing of the interpretation. A deaf interpreter takes that extra moment to make sure that the language is represented accurately. And if Jordan, would you like to add to that? Certainly. For deaf interpreters, often called DIs, they have that innate culture. They have the language that has been, with them their whole life. And when they are providing interpretation, they're trying to make sure that that works with whoever the deaf community is. Non-deaf interpreters also do attempt to do that, but they usually tailor it to a specific group of individuals versus a deaf interpreter is trying to really adapt to a wider audience and making sure that that message is clearly articulated. And including those specific nuances, cultural inferences, clarifying that information because we have a wide variety of individual and language use across the community. So trying to make it as accessible to all viewers as possible.
Great, great. And so can you explain to our viewers who aren't deaf why ASL interpretation is better than closed captioning?
It really depends on the individual, their literacy skills, what kind of language they've had and access. Were they born into a family who is non-deaf, and did they have access to those services? Were they able to learn sign language, from birth? Were they without language? Were they language deprived? Did they learn ASL as a late language learner? And so there's if sometimes if they are language deprived, that they're losing that theory of mind that often comes with somebody who was born with language from birth. And again, the skills will vary. So some captions are great and some captions are not so good as well as American Sign Language isn't, exactly like English. The structure is different. We do use some English words, but when providing that visual language or the sign language, the grammar is different, the syntax is different, the semantics are all based in that culture, and it has a different approach than English. And so that is a big difference versus a interpretation versus captioning. Captioning is, it's certainly an aid to the community, but it's not the same thing.
Right.
And with captioning, often you're missing pieces like the tone of the message, the cadence of the phrase. Just whether somebody is being sarcastic, somebody that's just not there. You're missing all those additional linguistic features. Whereas an interpretation, it can be, represented visually. The sarcasm is there, the character, the personality, is the person being funny? Are they serious? How they're expressing themselves? Are they trying to be convincing? Or what is their purpose? And so there's a lot of benefits to having the interpretation within the video versus just a caption. Are we trying to engage the audience? Are we trying to draw them in? What is the purpose behind what's being said?
That's amazing. That's great. I'm sure a lot of us who don't know how to sign, who aren't part of the deaf community, have no idea about these really, really important nuances that you're sharing. Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your wisdom and for educating all of us on these ideas, these concepts. It's super interesting.
Oh, well, thank you very much for, allowing us to share and being involved and helping people to learn more about deaf, the deaf culture and deaf people in North America. And hopefully that will allow more bridging between the two communities. And I really appreciate it.
That's great.
Yes, and Jordan is also saying thank you. We know that since the world has been changing and there's been a lot more, ability to socialize in different groups, and that has its own barriers and challenges, but often, with the internet and what we've noticed is that there's more access to learning ASL. You can see more things online, and even just to learn the language or any languages, English, French, langue québécois, LSQ. So being able to keep an open mind and an open heart and collaborate with each other is, helping to garner, understanding between cultures, and certainly happen to be involved in that process and want to say thank you. And Joanna is wholeheartedly agreeing.
Thank you so much. We break down barriers together.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Great.
And it's very cool.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving us your time today.
Absolutely. No problem at all. Thank you again.
Okay.
And thank you from Jordan.
Thanks.
You have a great day and stay safe.
Okay,
yes, and
you
take care.
too. Okay.
Bye-bye.
So that's our show for today, and that's a wrap on Crip Tips TV. Thank you so much for joining us for this series. Now, Crip Tips TV is produced by Sick and Twisted Theatre. And if you enjoyed this series, you should follow us on social media or join our mailing list, because there's plenty more programming where that came from. Coming up from May 13 to 16, we're producing a cabaret called Cripplepalooza that will be available online. So check us out, stay informed. We'd love to see you again. Thanks so much for watching. Stay safe.